Captain Randy Cramer. I'm a genetically augmented soldier from a covert military space program arm of the Marine Corps under Project Moonshadow. It started by someone deciding that they wanted to take some of my mother's DNA and my father's DNA and engineer me in a laboratory with some augmented extraterrestrial DNA to mix it all in for fun. That is how I started out in all of this. I was genetically engineered in a lab from the ground up. My understanding is that the scientists and engineers who created me did in fact create me in a laboratory that was terrestrial bound, meaning it was here on planet Earth when that happened, yes. The project was called Project Moonshadow. It was one of the earlier augmentation projects that was trying to not use trauma-based mind control. It was an attempt to create augmented soldiers without having to break them 100 times to make us more durable. Because breaking soldiers again and again using trauma-based mind control makes them fragile.
Did you find that it was actually successful, or
I would say much more successful. I mean, I'm together as I am when my head's not complete oatmeal because I was built in a better way and not broken again and again and again. Yeah, I mean, I still had to self-repair from the combat trauma, but I didn't have to repair nearly as much from the training trauma. So. Well, I was trained from the time that I was a toddler up through my teenage years, and then when I was 17 was when I got deployed. So that was when they decided I got my actual deployment for a 20-year tour, which, you know, people call it 20 and back, into the covert military space program arm, which was a contracting out to the MDF, which is the Mars Defense Force.
Did you actually join the U.S. military prior to your recruitment?
No, I actually never joined or volunteered. I have joked, but factually, when I joke, I have been a Marine since I was a baby. So I was United States Marine Corps Special Section, entered into the system when I was an infant. So somewhere there's a piece of paperwork that has my name and an incept date, you know, when I'm an infant as an E1. I was never recruited. I was engineered to be trained and to be deployed from the ground up. So it was my purpose in being created that is what I was going to do. There was no, hey, you want to come do this? It was like, no, we're engineering you. We're training you. You're doing this. It was never, no volunteer. Most of the emphasis on our heightened abilities is around what I really say is basically faster, stronger, smarter. So, you know, as far as being combat trained in every aspect of infantry combat, but trying to make us, you know, a little smarter, a little stronger, a little faster so that we adapt all of those tools a little bit better. So, you know, just trying to make the soldiers from our program whatever cutting edge above anything else that anybody else has, by at least some measure. In the MDF, a typical uniform is I mean, it's kind of like a G suit, but it's not really a G suit, but it's a protective undergarment, outer garment that you wear underneath a powered body armor environment suit. So, it's a hydraulically, if anyone's ever seen an exosuit, you know, the hydraulically powered suit, so you've got your legs fit in, your arms fit in, there's a torso section, it's hydraulically powered so that you can jump farther, run faster for longer periods of time, with a big old, what I call a Buzz Lightyear helmet on it, because it's this big domey helmet on it, because it's got a heads-up display in front. And you can't, I'm sorry, Iron Man has it wrong. You can't have a heads-up display that's 2 inches from your face. You have to have a heads-up display that's at least 6 inches from your nose, or you can't see it. So that was typical. That was our typical uniform of the day. It was something called the Archer Series powered body armor and environment suit. The garment that we wear underneath is basically like a charcoal gray, and the suit itself is kind of a reddish orange. The environment suit, heavy armor set, we used to call it, is like a reddish orange.
And were you able to outrun some of the wildlife on Mars using it?
Oh, outrun, and yeah, certainly native wildlife we could pretty much outrun and outjump without too much difficulty.
Why don't you talk a little bit about the wildlife? Because NASA shows Mars as a dead planet, and so if we have bases on Mars, then that means the air is breathable. Could you comment about that and maybe what kind of wildlife you might have seen?
Sure. The environmental conditions, while NASA likes to say that there's, not necessarily livable life, I have some JPL satellite photos that show trees and large biological animals. The equatorial region, which I've only been to a couple of times, has some bigger animals. But where we were, which was much farther north, everything was very small. So little birds, little lizards, little burrowing rodents, mammals. But as soon as you get underground, things can get a little bigger. So there were some cave spiders, which were pretty big, and giant salamanders, which, the size of a bus. That's animal life anyway. The biological life on Mars is incredibly similar to that on Earth. In fact, I would say that they're so genetically similar that there are some things that could be nearly the same or incredibly closely related. So sisters, sister planets, sister genetics. The trees are very similar. The shrubs are very similar. Like I said, little, ground burrowing birds that are incredibly similar. It was eerily similar. Without the gravity difference, there are times when you wouldn't have been able to tell the difference. You would have thought you were in the Southwest desert or in Utah or something like that without the gravity change.
Did the scientists ever take any of these samples, any of these animals or plant samples back to planet Earth and see if they could survive here?
That was nothing that I was ever a part of, but I can only presume that we have scientists and engineers and biologists who are collecting samples and studying them there, bringing them back here for study as well. I would think that that would be pretty common.
So you mentioned that gravity is about zero point 0.4 of planet Earth. So that would mean that if somebody grew up on Mars, they probably would not be able to come back to planet Earth.
Right. So the bases that we have there have gravity plating that mimics Earth gravity. So, we would be in our barracks under 1G, but then step outside to 0.4G. And the headquarters at Ares Primus, which is the military headquarters, the administration headquarters of the MDF and the MCC, which is, again, the Mars Defense Force and the Mars Colony Corporation. And the colonies also have this gravity plating built in the flooring, which brings everything to 1G so that people who live there and are raised there can go back and forth. But otherwise, yeah, if you were actually raised in that 0.4G gravity, you could not come back to planet Earth in a 1G, or you'd feel crushed and you wouldn't be able to breathe. Ares Primus? Hard to say exactly how big it is. The tarmac outside, I'd say, extends for at least a mile in either direction. And then there's this, a mountainside with this massive, what I would say like a building frontage in front of it. And then obviously the base behind that is much larger and goes back into this mountain. But I've never been through the whole thing, so I couldn't say how big it is. But I'd say it's at least 100,000 square feet or more. Probably, 150,000 square feet. 90% of the facility is underground. So the landing tarmac, ships come down, can land outside on the tarmac, and then there's a couple different entrance points to go inside or down into the facility. So not more than 90% of the facility is underground or protected by mountainous rock. The sky is blue. The reddish tint comes from a filtering that they put in on the rovers and pictures like that to try and make the planet look scary. But it's blue sky. Standard blue sky.
Did you ever have any critters try to break into the base or walk on the tarmac? Any like giant spiders or crickets?
We didn't typically have invasive pests coming into the barracks or into the base. There were indigenous species, reptoid species, insectoid species. Sometimes you could have an incursion into the facility. That did happen from time to time, but the animal life pretty much stayed away. So we had a pretty imposing defense system. So,
were the reptilians and insectoids that you encountered native to this planet?
Yeah, the indigenous insectoids and reptoids are from there and have been there for a very, very, very long time, as far as I know. My understanding is the indigenous insectoids arrived there some hundreds of thousands of years ago. So they've been there for a really, really long time, but they're not evolved from there. But the reptoids are an evolved species that evolved from, lesser rock lizards. I would probably describe them. And like, if we're either evolved or genetically, altered from primates, they are evolved or genetically altered from, little rock lizards. Their height would vary, for the indigenous reptoids, height would vary from about 5.5 feet to about 7.5 feet tall. The big ones, the 7.5 footers, can be very imposing and very frightening. They're broad-shouldered, really thick, very strong. So yeah, fierce, big, gigantic, lizard men. They're a little imposing. Yeah, I would say that their skin tone tended to be in sandy colors. So sort of from a tan to a reddish brown to a brownish tan. But then they would have patterns that could be anywhere from a bright yellow, black, red, brown, that would create these patterns, typically on their backs, arms, and sometimes on their heads or faces.
And were they tribal, similar to the Native Americans here in the New World? Or were they extremely advanced?
Well, both. They have this incredibly advanced understanding of science and technology, have the ability to do some pretty advanced things with science and technology, but they tend to live in a much more primitive state, and they tend to live sort of like tribal communities, but, with some advanced understanding of how they build the structures that they live in, and the technology that they're using for heat and light is interesting, and not just like, fire pits or torches or something primitive like that. So they have kind of this interesting blend of advanced technology and what I would call sort of basic, almost primitive living, and almost like Amish people. I mean, they have this ability to understand and use technology, but they use it in a very limited sense. They tend to prefer to live a simple, simplistic, non-technological lifestyle. And that comes from their own sense of what it means to be near planetary destruction. So that attitude comes directly from having the planet nearly destroyed by advanced technology and, warlike technology. So they believe that returning to this simpler, more spiritual life is a way of not following down that same path again towards self-destruction. But they're very capable. Very capable.
Did any humans ever go try to interact with these reptilians, maybe even live with them just to study them?
My squad was actually captured, and we spent 5.5, almost 6 months living with them.
So the natives are not really friendly, is what you're saying?
No, actually they are, interestingly enough. The indigenous reptoids, on the field, they're a warrior species, so they're fierce to deal with, and as long as we're kind of showing up in force, like, let's go, they show up in force, let's go, and so, we're fighting constantly, but when we were captured, we weren't treated cruelly or tortured or anything like that. They wanted to understand more about us, initiate some communication, and understand whether we were a pest or a worthy family member or distant cousin, or how they should deal with us. And they did some genetic testing and found out that we were, long lost cousins from some thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of years ago. And so decided that 5.5, 6 month period was getting to know them very well. It was living in their communities as members of the communities, participating in daily activities, and going through some of their warrior training and psionic training. No, they're actually really nice, to be honest with you. It's completely speciesist to say that reptiles are all cold-hearted, non-feeling, creatures that just want to dominate or eat people. They had incredible compassion from their hearts, were very caring and loving to each other, and were incredibly kind and compassionate to us, like on a level that I was not expecting at all. And I found disarming and touching, and I consider them an extended family because of that, for sure. They primarily subsisted as far as their diet on giant salamander tails. So again, these salamanders about the size of a truck. So they cut the tails off and chop them up and dry them and cook them into a bunch of different dishes, soups and stews and meat pies. But everything is mixed with sort of different fungi, mosses, lichens, some grasses, no sugar, no spices. So everything tastes kind of like dirt and mud, but you kind of develop a taste for it. It's incredibly nourishing food, but it doesn't necessarily taste yummy at first, but it's actually really healthy and good for you. So, but that's pretty much they subsist as variations of, what they make, 8 different dishes of, salamander tail.
Did they ever give you a name of their names, or were they telepathic?
They actually speak a pretty good English. Their tongue and their palate is different than ours, so when they're speaking English, it's with a thick accent. But and it takes you a few minutes for your ear to kind of start to tune into the accent, like someone with a really thick foreign accent. But they actually speak pretty good English, and they're not really into they don't like us to speak their language very much because we do it badly, and they kind of consider it insulting. They consider it a little bit of an insult to pronounce their words and their language badly, so they don't really they taught me a few words, but they didn't want me to try and speak very much. They communicated primarily in English. They definitely had some advanced psionic abilities, and we could communicate through telepathic communication, but their main thing was verbal communication. They talked to each other.
Did they ever tell you what their names were?
Yeah, I mean, they certainly would pronounce their names to me, but most of the time we would come to an understanding of a name that I would give them so that it was something that I could familiarize myself with, but again, wouldn't be insulting by saying their name badly, because they have this deep belief system that not only what you say matters and creates your reality by vibration, but how you say it is really important. So they're really precise about that.
What did you call
them? Different names. Most of the time we would just come to an understanding of, they would tell me what their name was, and then we would kind of have this conversation where I would pick a name to call them that would usually be a mnemonic around something similar that their name was, or not, depending. The main sort of person who I spent a lot of my time with was a shaman chieftain, and his name was pretty complicated to pronounce, so he had me pick a name for him, and I'm not exactly sure why I did this. I come from a very traditional Bible family, I guess, and so I called him Ezekiel. So, that was his name.
And he was okay with that?
Yeah. Oh, he was perfectly fine with that. Felt that was perfectly appropriate. I mean, it was a fascinating experience, and I just want to re-emphasize that they're highly intelligent, highly empathic, compassionate beings, fierce warriors who, have earned the right to be terrifying and respected because of, what they do on the battlefield. And they prefer a type of, hand-to-hand, handheld weapon combat, up close, with this ability to use their psionic abilities as well. But they pull their punches with us, to be honest with you. If they'd really wanted to bring the fist, I mean, they would have been able to crush us on the battlefield. But they mostly just wanted to, all right, let's, see what you can do, kind of a thing. And it was a testing thing. They also have different sayings, like they fight to right and they fight to truth. So if you need to understand the truth about something, or you need to understand the truth about someone, you fight them. That's how you get to the truth of it. That's how you get to know someone's true soul, by fighting with them.
How did you get liberated from these reptilians?
After about 5.5, 6 months, they let us go. They basically gave us our gear back and sent us back and said, okay, tell your people all about us, and tell them we're ready to talk when they want to talk.
Did they ever allow any of these native reptilians to roam about the headquarter base?
No, no. At no point were indigenous reptoids or insectoids, to my understanding, allowed to roam around any of our facilities or bases. At one point, when we did start to make early diplomatic arrangements with the insectoid species, we spent some time going to their hives, and there was an exchange program. So some of their personnel were going to a facility that we had somewhere. It wasn't our facility, but there was some exchange of some of their people coming to hang out with us for a while, and we sent some people to one of their hives to hang out with them for a while. And that again was about, a 6-month period.
Anything else you want to share about the reptilians?
Again, I deeply respect them for who and what they are, and they are a both formidable opponent and formidable ally. And from watching what they could do with their psionic combat abilities when they really wanted to, I would suggest that if we wanted to advance ourselves to the maximum ability of our capabilities as human physical psionic warriors, we need to train with them.
You also mentioned privately yesterday that the reptilians taught you certain abilities. Can you describe any of that?
I don't like to go too much into the things that they taught us how to do because, just to be quite honest, it will sound braggadocious. Suffice it to say that they taught us to maximize our abilities to manipulate energy and matter around us to be able to do, even more amazing superhuman types of things in combat arenas.
Okay, so at this point, let's also go into the insectoid side of this. Could you describe what these insectoids look like and what were your interactions?
Sure. The insectoid species, the drones, as I would refer to them, about 5.5 feet tall. And while a lot of people refer to them as a mantid species, that's perfectly fair, but they, to me, looked a lot more like a giant ant. So they got 2 legs that they stand on, their upper appendages that they use with their arms, and then they have these 2 middle appendages, which can be either or. So depending on whether they need extra ground stability to hold on to something or to stabilize themselves, or 4 arms to grab or pick or manipulate something, depends on what those 2 middle appendages are using. They're upright walkers. They have the ability to communicate verbally, but they're, I would say, even more dependent on psionic communication. So the first time that I ever communicated with one of them, it was a mental telepathic communication, but they also taught us a few words. But their language was even harder to understand than the reptoid language because the insect palate is even different, more different, and it's a lot of air hissing noises and with some slight humming sounds in it. I mean, so it's really just difficult for our ear to distinguish a lot of the different sounds to be able to pick out what the words, mean in a sentence or something like that. But so they primarily communicated telepathically. But their main thing, though, was they didn't like to fight themselves. They typically engineered other insects to do the fighting for them. So most of the time when we ended up in a combat arrangement with the insectoids, it was being swarmed by, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or millions of other smaller insects. Anything, stinging beetles that, are like the size of a volleyball or the size of a small dog in some cases. It would just get frenetic, to be honest with you. It was,
They would send millions of...
It's some swarms. I mean, in some cases, tens of thousands, some cases hundreds of thousands, in some cases what would seem to be like millions of them just flying around in the sky around you. I might be exaggerating those numbers, but from what it appeared to be, when you're in a swarm cloud of insects, it feels like millions of them. So they genetically engineered them all inside their own hives or inside their own bases and hatched them out. And then, they'd hatch out whatever they needed, on a daily basis. And because the sort of reproductive growth process by hatchlings is pretty quick, so they could hatch out, 100,000 insects for a swarm. all of those insects could get wiped out, and they could, hatch out another couple 100,000 by the end of the week or something like that. So they were a formidable force just because of the vast numbers that they could present at any given time. They didn't wear any clothing. The insectoids were, as buck naked as anything else. They were just, exoskeleton, and that was about it. But a giant insect looks really different than one, that you're looking at that's this big. So, I mean, the exoskeletons were shiny, but also, covered with like little hairs. So they were kind of, in some places, almost furry because they're big at that point. And so you can see, these sort of feeler hairs that they have on their arms and their legs and on their thorax and abdomen. So depending on what part of their exoskeleton you were looking at, it could be, sort of really smooth and really shiny or slightly fuzzy. The reptilians did wear clothing. They actually, this is an interesting point. Again, they tended to live in a manner that was fairly primitive, but the cloth that they made their clothing out of was incredibly finely milled. I mean, it was like really like finely milled, silks or cottons. I don't think they ever used cotton. A lot of it was more like silk, but it was incredibly finely milled. Looked like it was, like, wow, that's like a really advanced group of people made that clothing. The warriors would come out into battle with sort of, for lack of a better word, we'll call it like chainmail, but a lot of it wasn't made out of metal. It was pieced together using bits of stone or shell that they would, weave together and then drape over themselves. Quite pretty, actually, in some cases, to be honest with you. We did have personal interactions with the insectoids. In fact, we were doing a patrol one day, and we're out in front of one of their hives, and they were kind of out milling around, bringing things outside and laying them out into the sun for some reason. And I had the notion that we were a small group and didn't represent a threat to, insectoids. And I suggested to members of my squad, I wonder what would happen if I just walked up there and tried to say hello. And one of the members said, oh yeah, go do that. I want to see that. I want to see you come running back here with one arm and your other arm screaming. And but it didn't go down like that at all. They were actually very nice, and we kind of waved at each other and had this really basic, introduction, like, hi, I'm Randy, I'm from over there. And this, drone looked at me and, communicated right into my mind and said his name was Steadfast. And he said, and I live here. And then I kind of didn't know what to say after that because I really didn't have a plan for anything past hello. And so we kind of stood there awkwardly for a minute. And then I was like, so can I go tell my friends that, can I bring back my friends later and, to meet your friends? And they were like, yeah, sure. And so, I went back to the base and told my CO that we had made contact and that they should notify the diplomatic corps. And he was like, no fucking way. It was, I got to admit, it was a ballsy move, and it just happened to work out, where no one got hurt. But, yeah. And then that started about a 6-month program where some of our personnel with the diplomatic corps went to visit them on a daily basis to communicate and try and understand them better, which eventually resulted in a peace agreement and a treaty. So we became friends after that. The drones themselves, I never witnessed them like try and bite somebody's, hand or face off, but they did not just engineer these swarms of insects, they also engineered a few larger giant insects. The giant centipedes were the worst. They're probably about 18, 20 feet long, 3-4 feet wide, with mandibles, a meter wide. I'd gotten bitten in half by one of those a few times. So, yeah.
Well, how were you able to survive?
Well, they have, the suit has automatic tourniquets, and we have these medical bulldogs. A bulldog is just a transport vehicle that moves people back and forth. And the medical bulldogs have these stasis beds. So they basically can take a wounded person, put them in a stasis bed, which slows down the metabolic processes so you die much more slowly. And usually that's adequate enough to get you back to the facility, get you into the holographic cellular regenerating beds, and start putting you back together.
Do you have memories of being eaten?
Ripped apart, bitten up, had, bite to the face and part of my jaw ripped off and stuff like that more than once. Yeah. So, but
You try not to have the memories?
I try not to think about it, actually.
Sorry.
Yeah. The giant centipedes could move really fast. I mean, we had this powered body armor that we could run and jump faster to get away from them. But if I was on 2 feet, not in a piece of powered body armor, I would not have been able to outrun one of them. They would definitely have been able to overtake us in a fight. They moved pretty quickly. I don't know like what I could compare. Well, I mean, they could probably scurry somewhere between 10 and 15 miles an hour. I mean, that's pretty quick for, someone on their feet. In where we were in sort of this northern region, which I often describe as sort of a longitude like Alaska, so it was much colder. The vegetation was smaller, so small shrubs, small trees, mostly were what we saw there. I mean, again, things that looked incredibly similar or are nearly exactly the same to plant life here on Earth, just not on Earth. But most of it was, I'd say that I never saw a tree or a shrub that was, probably more than 4 or 5 feet tall, where we were in this, farther northern region. But again, I've seen some satellite photos of trees that looked like really big coniferous trees, like tall fir trees or pine trees.
Did you ever go to the equatorial region and explore that?
I never explored it. That was where we landed at Ares Primus. So when I first arrived, it was in the equatorial region. And the couple times that I'd been back and forth to Ares Primus, I'd been there. But it's not an area that I spent time, roaming around the outside or out in the desert to know much about that area personally. I've heard plenty of other stories about it from some other people, but I have very little personal experience in that.
Can you describe what the equatorial region looked like?
Again, it all looks fairly similar. It's kind of this high desert atmosphere, fairly sparse. You've got this yellowish to reddish to sandy colored rocks and gravel and sand on the ground for the most part. That's a lot of iron oxide, so there's a rust smell in the air. So you've got this thin air and this rust smell that kind of smells like an old factory. But again, I didn't spend time like roaming around to talk much about what the wildlife or plant life was in the equatorial regions. The economy of the colonies of Mars, I don't know a ton about, but I do understand that there is, they have their own monetary system, which is like little plastic coins with chips in them and some paper money that also has like, magnetic strips like we do, so that you can't just counterfeit it. The colonies are attempting to be self-sufficient. So there's mineral mining, water mining, raising of their own agriculture, some ranching. I talked to a guy who was a pig farmer at one of the colonies there, so helped raise pigs. So there's Mars bacon.
Did the pigs eat the native grasses?
I honestly don't know. We didn't talk much about that. I think that they're not raised outdoors. They have to be raised in a protected indoor environment. The wind and, external environmental conditions can still get pretty fierce. So we can't just live out on the surface without being in, protected structures. So the colonies, to my understanding, are either mostly underground or under domes that are, sort of countersunk into the ground.
So can you comment a little bit more about the food production? I guess they have hydroponics, and did they import food?
My understanding is, again, the attempt is to be self-sufficient. I don't think that they are 100% self-sufficient from what I've heard. So there's some importing, exporting of, lacks and surpluses. We got cafeteria food that, I don't know where most of it was coming from, whether it was being made locally or whether it was all being shipped there. But we did more than once have like a strawberry pie or a strawberry cobbler that someone insinuated, didn't have a strawberry in it. So that makes me presume that it's a different kind of fruit from somewhere else that has the strawberry ester, which is what gives strawberry their smell and their taste. But no one would say where it was from or where it was coming from or what fruit it was. But I'm kind of presuming it was a non-terrestrial fruit that just tasted and looked and smelled exactly like strawberries.
Did they have coffee?
Yes, we did have coffee. Luckily, we had coffee to drink.
They probably would have had to import that from Mars.
I would almost guarantee. I don't know that they could grow, good coffee on Mars somewhere. That was probably imported. But yeah, I don't know specifically what the dockets of things that they're bringing in and things that they're shipping out are. But there's an attempt to be self-sufficient, but they're not completely self-sufficient. So there's some cost and there's water shortages, so they are mining water, and from my understanding, there's some importing of water that they have to do as well. Population numbers are hard to say. We know a few years back that the general census that was being done was about 10 million population for the colonies, and we are pretty sure that the MDF is at least 150,000 plus personnel. That could be upwards of 200 and some thousand. Since the colonies started in about 1975, we know that some of the people who live there now are, sons and grandsons and daughters and granddaughters of people who, were sent there in the 70s. But there's certainly, they're adding personnel and people to the colonies all the time. And from what I understand, a good number of those people are, in some cases, people that they recruit, in some cases, people that get to volunteer, who are in special programs, who get the opportunity to volunteer, and in some cases, people who are just straight up kidnapped, to live there. I don't know enough about the originations of the MDF to know exactly how or when it started, other than it was, again, right about the same time that the colonies formed. They, put together this military contractor, which was the Mars Defense Force. So I don't know what kind of tools they had, what kind of weapons they had at first. I'm not very sure about that. The medical technology that they used was a holographic cellular regeneration assisted technology, which uses a holographic projection of your ideal genetic code to a cellular level. So it uses something called dominant harmonic frequency resonance to tell damaged cells to conform to the holographic projection and restore to perfection. Or if you lose a limb, you can grow back an entire limb, because that same holographic projection fools the nuclei of the cells in your arm or your leg and will continue to grow out to your fingertips or your toes, because it thinks there's more arm there. It's a holographic cellular regeneration assisted technology, but it's typically called a holobed, or, that's the short version of it.
On your website, I noticed that you were doing a GoFundMe campaign to get some technology out. Is that what you were doing with this?
Yes, I have a chief engineer who's an ex-NASA guy who's brilliant, and we have had a lot of discussions about how to replicate this technology, and we certainly have had the nuts and bolts conversations about what we would need to do for the holographic projectors, what we need to do for the computer software to replicate this technology. I would suggest that what we could do at first is not replicate the technology that we were using to the same level. The technology we were using had a number of what I would call acceleration addendums to it, so that, when I was in the MDF and had to have my leg or arm put back together, it would happen really quickly compared to what a device that, let's say, we could develop and build here could do. But that doesn't matter. I mean, it doesn't matter. The difference, if I could, a military grade holobed, if I had lost my arm and I could regrow from my elbow to my fingertips in, say, 4 to 6 hours, that's incredibly fast. Doesn't matter if we make a device here that takes someone, sessions every day that take 2 to 3 hours a session that takes 3 months to regrow an arm. It doesn't matter. We can still regrow an arm. So even
it's better not having one.
Yeah, it's better than not having one. So we're talking about, in some cases, treatments that would be regular, ongoing, that you'd have to come back for again and again and again and keep getting the process done, but you'd still be able to get it restored perfectly. So we could restore destroyed limbs, severed limbs, any type of damaged tissue, cancer, anything. Really, you can restore anything that's damaged or not perfect back to a state of cellular perfection.
What about cognitive disorders like bipolar, schizophrenia?
My understanding is you can restore the biology of the brain when you're talking about psychological or neurobiological disorders. So you can fix whatever's going on in the biology, but if what's happening is in the psychology more than the biology, those devices don't fix it. They don't repair that. They can't repair psychological damage. They can repair the physical damage or physiological damage.
Okay. And how about people that have been through like severe trauma, like that suffer from MPD, DID? Would it be able to help integrate that similar to a trip seat?
Not when you experience trauma. This device doesn't heal the trauma at all. I've healed from it since the end of my tour, a lot of it. The trauma that I had. But yeah, I came back with a lot of trauma. It would restore, arms and legs back to perfection. You get up and look at yourself and go, oh, I'm good. And, you go back to duty at that time, not thinking necessarily that you were suffering any trauma. But yeah, later on, when my tour was over, when it all sort of caught up with me for sure. So it doesn't seem to restore or heal the physical trauma. It will heal the physical damage, but the trauma is on an energetic central nervous system level. So this technology could definitely keep someone young forever. So, if you started, really, you could be any age. You could be 45, you could be 95, and get put into one of these beds and have your cells all over your body restored to a younger, healthier state. And you could keep getting those kind of treatments theoretically nearly forever. So we're still finding out how long we can keep people alive using that technology. But we've got, officers serving who are well over 100 years old now because they were World War II service officers who, once that technology came along in the 50s and 60s, they were able to keep them going forever. So we've got some incredibly experienced personnel.
Why don't the people of Mars share this technology with planet Earth? If they're so advanced, they could help us out. We're their brothers and sisters.
Well, the colonists are given a narrative that there is no more life on planet Earth, that we've destroyed ourselves, and that, through nuclear war or whatever. And so they, in order to keep those people from wanting to come back here or visit, to try and isolate the cultures and the two societies. So from their point of view, we're not here at all. So it would be this kind of a whole other stretch for them to go, oh, hey, here, we're going to share this technology with you and help you. It's also a technology that is just very closely guarded. And so people are really leery to just hand out a technology that could make, people you give it to effectively immortal. It's not necessarily something wants to go, here, have this immortality technology. So that's one of the reasons why we're attempting to build it from the ground up, because we know that it's going to be an incredibly difficult process to get the technology that exists as it does through the layers of secrecy and through the doorways and walls of protection that people don't want it to go through. Could take decades, and to be honest, we probably could build one prototype from the ground up in a shorter amount of time. The progress that we've made developing this technology is at this point all on paper and all discussing how we would solve component issues. So understanding the software issues, understanding the precision issues with the software that we need to accomplish, understanding the precision issues with the hardware that we need to accomplish, knowing what some of those protocols would be. We've had these conversations, but it's not cheap to get this kind of project off the ground. we need engineers, laboratories, manufacturing laboratories, and facilities. So we're talking about millions of dollars of startup costs to get it going. So we do have some funding apparatuses, putting it out to people who have larger amounts of money to put into that. And we've negotiated and discussed it with a number of people. Most of the people who've got the money to invest want something that we're not willing or unable to give them as a return on their investment. We're perfectly happy and capable of giving, working out return on investment to investors, but just so far what people have wanted are things that we're not willing to give them. We're not willing to give control of the technology. We're not willing to give someone the ability to just take a prototype and run off to some other company or some other manufacturer and undercut us. So we understand enough about, the business world that if we're going to develop this and not have it get stolen or co-opted, we have to have some control and precision around our ability to keep it proprietary. Startup cost is about 24 million. And that's just to make sure that my engineers are, going to get paid for the next decade. I'm not going to hire engineers and then 3 years from now tell them, oh, we're running out of money. No, if I'm going to hire engineers to work on this for 5 to 10 years, I want to know that I've got a payroll account that's paying them for the next 10 years. As far as FDA approval, we understand that there would be some resistance, but we also understand that the minute you have a before and after video of, say, a bunch of, Iraq and Afghanistan veterans playing wheelchair basketball, and then you have the after video of them all playing basketball with their new arms and legs, that people will just demand it. And, that process will sort of happen through the public disclosure and public demanding it process. So if we were to do it completely by the book, as it were, there'd be a lot of resistance. But we understand that it's the kind of technology that once people see that it exists and that it works, there will just be a demand for it. And so we'll get it through at some point.
Are you also going to look into getting patents?
Oh, yeah, of course. We'll patent every piece of equipment and every piece of every component of technology as we move along through the process. We don't want someone to just, again, steal our idea and then put it on a shelf and, not have it, released to the public, which is what, car companies and oil companies have done with these, carburetors for decades. It's like, oh, you got a carburetor that gets 100 miles to the gallon? We'll give you $1 million for that. Great, on the shelf. No one's ever going to see that. So we're thinking ahead about these kinds of things, and we want to make sure that we don't run into that problem and that we are able to, again, develop, control the process, control the technology so that we can make sure that it gets out there.
So does this technology accelerate your intelligence as well?
I wouldn't say that the technology directly would accelerate intelligence, but it would have the ability to restore cellular tissue in the brain to ideal youthful levels that could increase the capacity for intelligence. My website is www.earthcitizenconsulting, all one word, .org, and then there's a link to the GoFundMe page for anybody who wants to, help out with that process. The intergalactic space station that orbits around Jupiter is a facility that is used to, what's the word I want to use, facilitate the communication of various species who want to negotiate treaties, contracts in a neutral environment. So this station that floats around Jupiter has several layers of what I will call floors underneath the main floor, which are smaller rooms for meetings and diplomatic ceremonies, etc. But the main room is about a mile end to end, circular around in a big circle that has windows floor to ceiling that are about 80 feet high, so that it can hold species, from 18 inches high to about 70 feet tall. So the largest species that I've ever seen in this room were absolutely, gigantic.
What do these 70-foot tall creatures look like?
For the most part, they were what I would describe as humanoid in the sense of, arms, legs, fingers, faces that you and I would recognize as being similar to our own species, only in some cases different shades, different colors of skin tones, blues, reds, yellows, and again being very, very large, and in some cases having, you know, more either roundish features or, you know, more rigidly sort of angular features. But I would consider them to be incredibly more close to humanoid than anything else. So that's interesting. They're meaning they're more genetically related to us, you know, than a lot of other species that I've seen. So it's interesting. Never personally interacted with the 70-foot tall giants. I did personally get to interact with a giant who was about 25, maybe 30 feet tall.
Was that positive, or did they look badly down on you?
No, it was actually an incredibly positive interaction. We had a very powerful conversation about temporal mechanics and, you know, how time works.
And you said, I believe you actually said you saw some dog-like creatures. Is that correct?
Yeah, Canis creatures, Canis beings. So they're about our height and have dog features and have features that are also what I would say are cross breeds. So, you know, we were sitting across a table of 4 of these different Canis beings, and they looked like different dog breeds that were, like, you know, evolved into, you know, a bipedal upright walking. And anyone who's ever had or known someone who's had like a husky knows that huskies don't bark. They talk like, row, 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 row. I mean, and they do. And so these Canis beings do the same thing. They talk kind of row, 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 row. And we had a translator box that they would talk into, and it would talk out in English, and we would talk into English, and it would talk row, 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 out the box. It was an incredibly fascinating experience. It's very surreal, but at the same time, because we have such a connection with dogs in our own culture, it was very comfortable, you know, talking to them because they're dogs. It's like, you know, I have a dog. I mean, so it was in some ways it made them less alien than some other aliens because we have this relationship with dogs here. So it was very interesting.
And did you say you actually went up to one of them and tried to scratch them?
No, I didn't actually do that. But there was one who was sitting across from me, had these kind of Cocker Spaniel ears. And so, they're, you know, Cocker Spaniels are kind of soft and fuzzy. And I just remember at one point as I'm kind of staring at him thinking that I wanted to reach over and go, oh, who's a good boy? And then I, you know, kind of shook it out of myself. I was like, no, Randy, do not start an intergalactic incident by scratching behind the ambassador's ear.
What other creatures did you interact with?
Quite a variety, actually. I've been there a couple dozen times, and each time it was something slightly different. And so I would, you know, species that are, again, similar to us, humanoid species, and some that were very different. So reptoid species, Canis species, feline species, a couple of cetaceans, kind of a squid people, a species that seems to be made up of plasma, kind of a liquid energetic plasma. So they really looked like they were made of neon lights, which is very interesting. And another species that seemed to be mineral based, like, you know, like a rock person. It was very interesting.
How did they move around?
You know, like you and I move around, they just kind of, so whatever, I mean, I don't know what was going on inside, you know, past the surface of their skin. You know, I don't think that they were like solid rock all the way through, but they certainly seem to be made up of mostly hard mineral. I didn't get to dissect one or look at a diagram, but because they seem to have an organic structure.
Did they have feet and legs, or did they?
Yeah, no, they were upright, bipedal, you know, 2 arms, 2 legs, but appeared to just be made of minerals, you know, hard minerals.
Did you see any Bigfoot or Yeti?
Yeah, actually sort of larger, furry, what we call Enkidu, you know, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, we call them Enkidu. So yeah, I mean, anywhere from, you know, probably about, you know, 7, 8, 9 feet tall.
Do you think the people of planet Earth will ever be invited to join into these intergalactic confederation?
I mean, we do have, we've signed a lot of treaties with a lot of species at these conversations over decades, I'm presuming. So through these treaties, we have entered into arrangements into certain intergalactic consortiums via these treaties. So yeah, we're very socially, politically, economically involved with the rest of the galaxy at this point. We have gone from a barely, intergalactically emergent culture, back in the 50s and the 60s to one that is completely involved with intergalactic commerce and manufacturing and trade right now. So as a subnote to that, apparently two of the largest exports from planet Earth to the intergalactic community are children's clothing, which I don't think are for children. I think that they're for children-size extraterrestrials, and beer. So apparently Earth beer is well loved. And the part that I think that I love about the idea of these children's clothing is, so you've got these, smaller species that are shorter, wearing, Earth children's clothing, which to me, I just can't help but thinking, there's some planet somewhere where some guys, little guys walking down the street and someone's going, oh, look, he's got those new Earth jeans on. So, apparently Earth fashion, they love it. And so
why don't they have their own fashion?
Well, apparently we make better stuff than a lot of other people do. There are a lot of species who don't bother improving things. So, really as cliche as it might be to certain people who probably watched a lot of sci-fi, robes are really like a mainstay of clothing for a lot of species. They just put on kind of a long, piece of fabric and like that's what they wear. But there are a lot of species who will make something, whether that's clothing or a spaceship or a computer or whatever, and if it works, great, don't change it. Like, let's just keep using that for the next 5 or 10,000 years. Why bother changing it? It works. We, on the other hand, make something 5 minutes after we're done making it, we're thinking, I know how to make a better one now. So in the last 70 years, where many species would have just like, we made that, we're good. We keep making something, improving it, improving it, improving it, improving it. So a lot of we just manufacture things better than many other species do. So they just love our stuff because we make good stuff.
Well, if they're importing clothes from planet Earth, then surely the people on Mars would know that planet Earth is still around.
Well, people on Mars don't necessarily know that. So a lot of these trade agreements are, and shipping arrangements aren't necessarily known to the general population. Also, there's manufacturing facilities on Mars for a lot of things too. So, what they're mostly importing and exporting from Mars, they wouldn't necessarily know that they're importing and exporting from Earth. They would be told that they're being importing and exporting from other colonies or from other planets, probably.
What about importing contraband movies or music, modern pop music?
That's a good question. We certainly weren't allowed when, in our military bases to have access to any music, any media, no newspapers, no, CDs, no nothing, no videos, no movies. We were allowed none of that. But there is, of course, some movement of contraband, from time to time. I can know that for sure, but we're not allowed to have it. That doesn't mean that, we never got contraband. It just means we weren't allowed to have it. We got in trouble if we were ever found with it, but I'll leave it at that.
So, Elon Musk has recently come out and said that he wants to go to Mars.
Right.
And do you think he knows that there's a Mars defense force and colonies on Mars?
I would think that Elon Musk has to know a lot more than he's telling. And I think that that's his main reason for wanting to go to Mars, is so that he can prove some of the things that he knows that are true, like that there's a breathable atmosphere and that there's native biological life. And I think he's been handicapped, as it were, in the sense that, okay, you want to go to Mars? Great. You're limited to rocket technology only. I mean, he's got to be aware of electrogravitics, magnetogravitic technologies, but he knows he's not able to use them. He's forbidden from using them. So he's like, all right, fine. I'll develop and make sophisticated rockets that I can, fire up and land automatically, on a platform out in the ocean to recover them and make it a cheap process. So I think he's got to know a lot more than what he would say. And I think that's a lot of his motivation of wanting to get there is, the fact that he knows that, but he can't say it any more than, a lot of other people can without taking a lot of heat or criticism that could get him in trouble.
Right. So what do you think about Donald Trump setting up the Space Force? Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Or
I would say the quote unquote creation of a Space Force is a foot in the door kind of thing, because anybody who knows that we already have one. So, now that we have a quote-unquote U.S. Space Force, it's a front, it's like a frontage to, a kind of a fake frontage to a real organization behind it. But that means they now have a headquarters and a CO and a Twitter account, and that can definitely facilitate the trickle through of technology from the covert military space program that's decades old. So in 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, they can say, oh, look at this new, fighter that we have that flies outside the atmosphere, to 800,000 feet or something like that. Or, oh, look, these new reconnaissance vehicles, these TR-3Bs that we've been developing covertly for the last decade, even though we've had them since the 60s. They can now roll stuff out like it's brand new or we've just been working on it when it's stuff that we've had for a long time. So it does allow for this potential to start rolling out a lot of information and technology by creating a front. So let's hope that it's a good thing.
Do you think we'll see a Trump casino on Mars anytime soon?
I think it's I don't know about anytime soon, but it's incredibly possible to see a Trump casino on Mars at some point. Yeah.
Awesome.
I mean, certainly if the guy has anything to say about it, he'll have one, right?
So why do you think they allow you to have your memories, or so many people involved in these projects get their memories wiped?
It was definitely part of my process that I was made under to be able to self-repair, which meant getting my memories back was part of the desired process. And United States Marine Corps Special Section has a very different attitude about a lot of these things than other agencies. So we don't necessarily want our personnel to never recover their memories. We want our personnel to be able to recover at some point and potentially continue their careers as civilians, or in my case, as an independent field commander, because, the whole point of engineering and building us the way that we did was so that we wouldn't be discarded and thrown away, but that we could be continued to be a useful resource. So I know that the command staff wants people to know the truth, because secrecy right now is more dangerous than telling the truth. We're in more danger by keeping secrets than we are by getting to the truth. So we think that's very, very important. So I know that I'm allowed to do what I'm allowed to do because we want to see a better future. We want to see disclosure, and, can't have a spokesperson whose brain is oatmeal. So at some point, I had to be able to get my memories back and fix all of that so that I could be a good representation for the command staff.
And do people ever contact you to ask you to join, to go to Mars?
I actually get a lot of emails from people asking me, how do I join up? How do I join the program? And I often, when I take time to email those people back, I say, have you not been listening to what I've been telling you? You do not want to do this. You do not want to join. It was a terrible time. But most of the emails are coming from younger people or kids who are, very fascinated. And it's one of the reasons why we think we need to get also to disclosure, because there are personnel shortfalls within the structure. And at some point, we need open enlistment. We need voluntary enlistment. So at some point, I have to say to those people, you want to join the military? I can't tell people they shouldn't. I believe in serving my country and serving my planet. And so someone who feels, the desire to do that in the same way, great, join up. So I think we should be able to have open enlistment so that people can join up if they want to and serve if they want to. That's a choice they should be able to make, I suppose. I mean, we certainly are going to need the personnel. We're going to need the bodies.
Did you ever happen to see rain or bodies of water on Mars?
Um, as far as water on Mars, there were some streams, ice, snow. We didn't get much rain, a little bit of precipitation, but mostly what we would get up north are some, mild snow flurries, which is incredibly fascinating to watch snowflakes come down in point 0.4 G. It's very, very, very slow. So it's like snow in slow motion.
Why doesn't the MDF or MCC release any photos of these facilities or bases?
Well, I do have someone who has access to backdoor computers at NASA that has, gotten some photographs to me showing of a little bit of what's going on there. But, they don't want to release a bunch of photographs right now because they don't want people, the MDF and the MCC don't necessarily themselves want people to know what's going on. There are other agencies that do, but some of that stuff's been leaked out. Some of that's available on the internet if people want to look around for it. But mostly it's not the folks on Mars who want the truth to be told. It's mostly people here who understand that we have to just get to the point of telling the truth so that we can bring this sort of quote unquote breakaway civilization and the old school civilization back closer together, because they're completely intertwined. One cannot exist without the other, like some people would like to think that maybe they can. And at some point we have to rise up the lower end of the civilization, which is what's happening here on planet Earth, and bring it up closer to that advanced quote unquote breakaway part of the civilization to bring us all back under one civilization. That's important for our survival as a species, as a planet, as a civilized world. It just has to happen for us to survive.
So basically, I'm not trying to discredit you or anything. I'm just saying because I'm in the same field of research as you. I don't really have any proof of who and what I am. But you do have an implant behind your ear that you said that was like a dog tag.
Correct.
Is there a way you could possibly develop some kind of RFID reader that could pull up the data?
That's a really good question. So yeah, I do have this dog tag implant behind my left ear that's visible, and I have another one behind my right ear that's just in the little divot behind my ear, so you can't see it, but I can stick my pinky finger in and find it. It is an RFID, so if we had a proper reader, then we could potentially read the data on there. I am talking to a surgeon about having this surgically removed to look at under an electron microscope. We should have some writing on the outside of it. Definitely once we could pull it out, it's something that my chief engineer and I could start working on, figuring out how to use different, RF resonance to try and see if we can get it to respond or read the data from it. So, with some research, it's very possible that we could be able to actually read the data off of it.
Okay. When you were on Mars, was there any discussion about terraforming the planet?
My understanding is the indigenous reptoids started terraforming Mars not long after the destruction of the atmosphere, and we have certainly been participating or assisting or participating in parallel projects to terraform Mars to get it back up to its sort of green, lush state that it used to be. It used to be very much like Earth, from what I understand, as far as oceans, water, vegetative life. So they're trying to get it back there. But you blow out the atmosphere and 90% of your water, and it's going to take a while to recover. So they're still in that recovery process.
Did the water actually evaporate into space, or is it underground?
A tremendous amount of it evaporated into space. There is quite a bit of it that's trapped in the soil underground. That's why there's water mining. There's still quite a bit trapped in the ice. So there's still a lot of water that's available there, but it's just not anything like what it used to be. There's definitely technology that can create water and can change the molecular structure of certain things into water, into hydrogen and oxygen. So there's a possibility to restore a lot of the water that they have there. That's very true.
So it probably would not be in our lifetimes unless they release these immortality techs before we see Mars turning into a beautiful garden planet.
It's very likely that, you and I will not see Mars return to a lush green and blue planet in our lifetimes. And again, unless we get, the extended life technology and we live to be centuries old. It's probably going to take a while, yeah.
Have you seen the original Total Recall movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger?
Yeah, of course. I've seen Total Recall with Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Have they ever tried to smuggle that onto Mars?
Not that I've seen. Not that I've seen. It's plausible deniability. The actual story and why am I drawing a blank at the author who wrote that? Philip K. Dick. So Philip K. Dick wrote the story. The original story doesn't take place on Mars. It takes place only on Earth. There's none of that Mars, story stuff that's in the narrative in the Schwarzenegger movie at all in the original story. So when they made a more recent Total Recall movie, for anyone who's seen that, it's the story, but again, none of it takes place on Mars. So putting that into this Schwarzenegger storyline was plausible deniability, because they knew that people who'd been serving were going to start getting their memories back, and they wanted to have some plausible deniability to say, you've just been watching Total Recall too many times.
What about of course, in the movie they showed alien structures.
Right.
Can you comment about pyramids or any type of, I don't know, Sphinx on Mars? Or
I haven't been to Sidonia, so I haven't seen the pyramids or the face or anything like that specifically. But we did one time on a patrol come up to what was obviously the very corroded and rusted out skeleton of a skyscraper buried into the ground. So there was remnant of advanced civilization, for sure, that we were looking at. I mean, you're seeing this, that what's left over of the lattice, 4 corners, and girders connecting the corners. I mean, that's a, skyscraper structure.
And so when do you think these cities were vaporized?
Thousands of years ago, from what I understand. About 10,000 years ago, from what I understand, give or take.
And supposedly the last golden age on Mars was 500,000 years ago. Is that correct?
To say that the last golden age on Mars was 500,000 years ago sounds about right, yeah.
How would you define a golden age?
I would define a golden age as a civilization that has, achieved a certain level of advanced understanding of, biology, chemistry, physics, and has decided to not, consume or destroy itself with war or greed. I would call that a golden.
It turned out the way it did.
Well, we had golden civilization here at one point too, and we can have it back. So just because we lost it, they lost it, doesn't mean you can't have it back.
And do you have any any idea how the atmosphere was destroyed?
My understanding was just a weapon was used that blew out the atmosphere and caused the oceans to boil, and a lot of that vapor to just shoot off right out into space before it, achieved some kind of equilibrium and created a new stratosphere.
And have you ever received any death threats for going public?
I haven't received any death threats for going public. I've certainly gotten some hate mail, and I got poisoned once with an industrial solvent or something that my lymphatic system had to start ejecting out. So I had this, orange oozy stuff that was coming out that had this oily sheen and smelled vaguely of petrol. And about 5 days later, it stopped. But then the result from that was a temporary paralysis of my gullet muscles so that I couldn't swallow solid food. So I was actually on a liquid diet for a year because of that.
Well, we're coming near the end of this, so I'm done with my questions. So what I'm going to do now is just give you opportunity to talk about anything else that you feel relevant that you would like to share that you haven't talked about already.
I'll add one thing to that. The command staff of United States Marine Corps Special Section thinks that there are 2 things that people should be doing to assist this process. One, do not underestimate social political participation. We have abysmal participation and voter turnout numbers in this country, and that's part of the problem. Politicians, even though a lot of people want to disagree with me on this, will respond to their constituency. They will respond to demands. They will respond to people, screaming and shaking their fists enough, because if enough people are voting, those votes matter, and that's how people keep their seats or lose their seats. So, and we know that certain senators and congressmen have taken it upon themselves to, try and do some research, try and start some programs to do research into unidentified aerial phenomena and so forth. So there are some attempts to move the ball down the field, as it were. And we can just not understate the importance of people being involved in that process to get that going. Two is that the other thing that people need to do is start evolving themselves. And so that's a consciousness thing. That's a physiological thing. It's one of the reasons why I'm teaching a class on psionics, to try and get people the basic fundamentals that they need to develop and advance their abilities so that we can go from a psionically emergent to a psionic civilization so that we can truly evolve. The two things that we have to do is evolve ourselves in a social sense, and that's social politics, and we have to evolve ourselves in a personal sense, and that has to do with evolving our minds, our bodies, and our consciousness. And that both of those things we consider to be incredibly important. So it's why we, talk about the things that we do to try and get that information out so that people can start evolving their process and evolving themselves.
So if they used you in these 20 years back, I'm assuming that after your 20 years of service, they returned you back to the point they took you.
Right, 15 minutes after I left.
So they have time travel technology. So that means they probably have also been to the future and they know how this is all going to turn out.
My understanding of that is that the future is a constantly evolving outcome. So we're moving towards a future which is being nudged to turn out a certain way. And so some people would like that to turn out very well. There's still some people who want that to turn out not so well, who think that purging the planet of billions of people or something like that is a good idea. We've done the numbers. It's a bad idea. It would cripple the economy of our planet, our solar system. It would cripple the military complex's ability to defend the solar system and defend the planet and defend the human species. So we don't think any of those things are a good idea. We think that, giving ourselves the best opportunity to succeed as a culture and a civilization is the best thing to do. But there's some notion of where we're going and how that's supposed to work out. It's been explained to me that if all goes as it's supposed to, we should be in a much, much better state by about 2048, 2050. Like, almost the golden civilization that we were talking about here. If all goes well, a lot of this should change rapidly over the next 30 years. And let's be honest about that. 30 years to some people may seem like a long time, but 30 years isn't that long of a time. I'll still be alive in 30 years. You'll still be alive in 30 years, almost certainly. So, that's not that far away.
Do you want to go back to Mars?
I would love to go back to Mars for my own closure. I mean, I don't want to go back to serve, but it would be just part of my own healing process to go back and say, okay, yeah, I was here. Yeah, this is what it was like. So, I know Vietnam veterans that went back to Vietnam for closure, and it would be something that I would like to do again for my own personal closure.
Okay, thank you, Randy. Now, why don't you go ahead and share your website again?
My website is earthcitizenconsulting, all one word, .org. And people can email me there, reach me there, look at all my material there. We're revamping it for those of you who look at it and go, you haven't updated anything in 2 years? Yeah, we're working on it. So we'll be repackaging everything and having a revamped website soon enough.
Anything else?
No, just thanks very much for having me, and pleasure to be here. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Please consider supporting Super Soldier Talk by purchasing your own Neo Meditation device. Your Neo Meditation device will help you reduce stress, integrate trauma, enhance intuition, enhance clairvoyance, and enhance creativity. Get yours now at www.neologicaltech.com.